Good evening. Tonight's Omnibus is prompted by a new feature film produced by David Putnam. It was the late Francois Truffaut who said, "You don't make your next film, you react to your last one." And in Putnam's new film, this is certainly the case. He's breaking new ground. The film is called The Killing Fields, and the story is set in Cambodia in 1974 during the final days of the Lon Nol government, as the communist Khmer Rouge guerrillas were completing their takeover of the country. And the killing fields of the title were the execution grounds where the Khmer Rouge dumped the bodies of those they killed. Now, at the heart of the film is a true story about two journalists who nearly died in their attempts to cover this war for their paper, the New York Times. In our Omnibus program, the real-life journalists describe what happened to them only 10 years ago, and their story is set against a background of archived news footage and a feature film unit at work in Thailand, meticulously recreating the Cambodian War for the cinema. Our film is narrated by William Shawcross, himself a journalist and the author of two books on Cambodia, most recently The Quality of Mercy, which was published in September. And Shawcross also made one of the great river journeys recently shown on BBC Two, which took him back to Cambodia. Our story begins, as it ends, in New York.
These two men are journalists, one American, the other Cambodian. 10 years ago, they were reporting a war on the other side of the world, which shattered both their lives and the lives of millions of people forever. Sidney Schanberg, who won the Pulitzer Prize for his critical coverage of the American role in Cambodia and suffered terrible guilt. Dith Pran, his loyal Cambodian assistant, who almost died because of his determination to cover the story to the end. Cambodia, a little country caught in the vortex of bloody war and revolution. When Cambodia was dragged into the expanding Vietnam War in 1970, it was quite unprepared. Troops went off to fight in shower shoes, on Coca-Cola trucks, and on bicycles. As well as the North Vietnamese, Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger bear great responsibility for stoking this 5-year inferno. Their policy was made without care. American B-52s bombed widely. Peasants fled the land as the communists grew in strength. Schanberg and other reporters wrote eyewitness accounts of the carnage for the breakfast tables of America. It made little difference. Now the story of Schanberg and Dith Pran has been made into a feature film by the British director Roland Joffe. The roles of Schanberg and Pran are played by Sam Waterston and Heng Nagor, himself a Cambodian refugee who suffered much the same fate as Dith Pran under the Khmer Rouge. It's a courageous and complicated film. It was shot in Thailand about a real war in neighboring Cambodia. It's about real, indeed living journalists trying to grasp and convey elusive truths. But it's also a feature film, which is intended to be a commercial success. It is not always easy to represent reality in ways which satisfy the box office. The idea for the film came from the British producer, David Putnam.
Cambodia, in a way, sums up a lot of experiences for a lot of people during my lifetime. In fact, it was a sort of the last holdover of the 60s. And one of the interesting things about the journalists that you talked to who were here at the time is they see it as a magic moment in their lives. And I've more and more come to realize that, in fact, the reason for that is they were allowed a kind of 5-year extension on 1968. And whereas many of us in the rest of the world were having to deal with new and fairly dismal realities, they had a kind of 5-year furlough where a lot of the feelings, and the best of the feelings in a way, of the late 60s, were sustained. And I think probably the Cambodian tragedy, the Khmer Rouge Holocaust, was actually the last vestige of the good guys and the bad guys, because what happened was the perceived good guys turned out to be very, very, very bad guys.
Close observation would have shown them always to be bad, but so was the war itself. Joffe's film tells the story of the death of Cambodia through the agony of Schanberg and Pran.
Basically, this is a film about a friendship, and everything else is merely laid on top of that. It's a film about a friendship. It's a film about a very unusual friendship, in a way, a unique friendship. It has a lot to do with the role of the yellow man and the white man and their relationship with each other. So I think what we're doing is building. It's very easy to view this film the wrong way out. This is a film about a friendship, which happens to be set in a political context, and in a very emotive political context. But it is a film about a friendship. It is not a political film with a friendship woven through it.
That was a year of the North Vietnamese coming across the demilitarized zone, and I was sent in to help in Saigon, and took the opportunity, because I still had this little bug inside me, this obsession with Cambodia, to go to Cambodia after my tour in Vietnam. And I met him then because in the interim, the New York Times had begun to use Pran as a translator and guide. And so he was our person when a New York Times correspondent was in Cambodia. I met him then. We became, over time, very close. And he became indispensable to me, not just as an interpreter and guide, but in a much larger sense. I relied upon his judgments, his good sense, his judgment of character, of the weight one should give to a politician's statement, of sometimes even more important, of what was meant by certain language used by, say, a Cambodian farmer, because the literal translation would not quite convey the meaning. And we'd sit sometimes for long periods of time discussing the real meaning of the thrust of what this person meant after a long interview. So he was indispensable. He read all the copy. I mean, I showed him everything, not for style or language, but for sense. And if he found anything he didn't think was quite right, he'd ask me about it, and we'd discuss it. Well, he was my colleague in every way.
I think he's a tough guy to work with. But when you get used, you know it. Once in a while, he get a bad temper that when he get angry, he try to do something, it doesn't work out. He gets so mad and he forget everything. I get insulted, I get humiliated by him. But one thing, he still have in his mind that he still keep me in out of public, keep me away from the public, so nobody know that I was kicked, I was insulted by him. But after a while, when he know himself he's wrong, so he apologized. But for me, when I get used, I know that's his habit. So I really don't blame him too much, because that's the way the people were born that way.
The Sid in the film is not the Sid in life. And there's no way that he could be. I mean, you can't, no more than our Cambodia is like Cambodia. I mean, all you can hope to capture is a sort of a rough inner spirit and hope that that will do. I mean, you can never really catch the complexity of another human being, I don't think. But you can just indicate a few directions in the same way that you can't catch the complexity of a country. I mean, I couldn't really make a film in Thailand about the kind of world that Cambodia was, because Cambodia was very different. But what you can do is to just indicate that it was Buddhist, that it had Buddhist traditions, that it had a certain innocence, that it was colonial and it was affected by its colonial past, that it was deeply troubled, that it was mystical and magical, and that it was going through a very deeply unpleasant and horrific time. And you can just give impressions of that, really.
Right. Facing which way, Dad? To drive out that way. Thank you, Brian. Now, Al, you're on your own. When Terry hits it, if it's safe, you go. Yeah? And I'll do the other one. Now, what you've got to keep an eye on for me, Chris, is that these people do not wander beyond this line. All right? Especially those kids. All right. Let's try it. Right, gel up. Gel up. Gel up. Let's go. Yeah, gel up. Now, just keep them all ready now while we gel up here. Right, no smoking, lads. No smoking now. Let's gel up. Now, young Chris, or whoever's with Michael, you must scream out to me if anything goes wrong. I'll be down here with this camera. Right, here we go then. Here we go. Action! Motorbike should be coming now. Where's the motorbike? There's a man and a little boy. Cut it! Whoa, 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 whoa! Cut it! Cut it! Cut it! Cut it! What? Whoa! Whoa! Get up! Why did they all fall to the floor before anything happened? I don't understand it, Sammy. Whoa, no laughing. They all went to the floor. Have you ever seen something so funny in all your life? All right, here we go then. Here we go. Action! Cross to the stalls. Use the stalls behind me. Use the stalls.
Quain, a British journalist, was in Phnom Penh with Schanberg and Pran.
It was very rare for grenades actually to be chucked in the streets of Phnom Penh by Khmer Rouge guerrillas or people working for them. Most grenades which were thrown in Phnom Penh were thrown by dissident members of the armed forces, people who bore a grudge against a cinema owner or a cafe owner, someone who'd fallen out with their girlfriend, anything like that. But that said, the actual carnage which those grenades in the film created on the street was very true to the spirit of what one saw almost daily in Phnom Penh towards the end of the war, when 122mm rockets were falling generally in heavily populated areas of the city, right in the city centre, in the marketplace, where people were doing their daily shopping.
I think what affected the style of the shooting was the story, and I think also the fact that it is finally about human beings, and that I wanted it to be a film about consequences, and I think that's what David wanted, and I'm sure that's what Sid wanted, and I hope very much that's what it'll be about, and it's the consequences for everybody of what a war is, in the same way that it's for everybody about the consequences of the actions of one person in relation to another, really. So that when we shot it, when we tackled scenes, what I tried to do is shoot them in such a way that you're aware that these are human beings involved, that if there's an explosion, the explosion is never the major thing in the scene, I hope. I hope that what the major thing in the scene is what the consequences of that act is. And I didn't want it to use Southeast Asia as wallpaper. I mean, I wanted it, which in a way I think that television coverage of the war did, because somehow it was never quite about Southeast Asia. It was somehow about America's involvement, but not about Southeast Asia itself. So it's an attempt to get close to some reality and to some sense in which people will understand what life might have been like if you were living in that country, as opposed to just coming in and shooting a gun or going home to America and facing the consequences.
This is actually a suburb of Bangkok, being cleared for a new motorway. In the film, it serves as Nik Lung, a strategic Cambodian town bombed through negligence by an American B-52 in summer 1973. In a sense, the entire war was the result of negligence, from which America alone was able to walk away. Schanberg and Pran were the first journalists to reach Nik Lung, where 137 people were killed and 268 were wounded.
So the kids are looking great, aren't they? Maybe what we should do, when we actually get the thing set, is see where that little tear is. If we get the tear where we want it, we can actually see the kid through the tear. We'll try it just about there. I probably need to reset it a bit, but we may need to pull you in a bit because of the market.
Right, forget it, Paddy. Take him out, give me another one. Where's that little child? Is there another one around? Another child?
Let me see.
Come here, child. Here, I'll put the fellow over there. Will you come and do it for me? Stand by it for me, Tommy.
This little kid who's crying, with just the way he was in his father's arms, is exactly like a picture from the hospital in Phnom Penh. A little kid actually who was wounded in the stomach and was ignored by the doctors because they didn't think the wound was very serious. And suddenly his father went up to him and found he was dead and held him in his arms and stroked his head. Which is very like
Come on the set a minute, please.
How do you react to this?
Not very well.
Emotionally?
Yes, I find it very upsetting. It was just when the kid started crying. It just suddenly seemed surreal.
Running.
Running, Billy.
Action! Stand up! All looking done. Done!
Go. Ready to go?
We're in Phnom Penh and were trying to get down there and couldn't. And eventually the American embassy held a press conference, sent the air attaché to the Hotel Phnom to talk to the press about the amount of damage that the bombs had caused to Nick Lung. And Sydney had just come back and filed his story. And this man sat down and he said that their bombing had caused what he described, and I quote exactly, I think, minor structural damage. And Sydney just exploded, and he said, "Do you call this minor structural damage?" And he pulled out his notebook, and he reeled off a Cambodian soldier who he'd photographed, just sort of weeping, saying this man who Sydney had interviewed had lost 11 members of his family in that bombing. So I think he was a very caring man, terribly caring.
By April 1975, it was clear that the communist Khmer Rouge were about to capture Phnom Penh and win the war. Refugees crammed into the shrinking enclave, which was shelled daily. The American embassy was evacuated by helicopter, and most foreigners flew out. The sideshow war was about to end. A few journalists stayed behind, including Swain and Schanberg. Dith Pran sent his family out, but bravely, if imprudently, decided to stay and help Schanberg. It was a decision which saved Schanberg's life, but nearly cost Pran his own.
There was a piece of Pran that still relied upon me as the person he served. I relied upon him for judgments. It became mutually symbiotic. Our thoughts became intertwined. Our dependence upon each other became almost complete. When it came down to the most important decision that we made, which was whether to stay in Cambodia or leave with the American evacuation on April 12th, it was the same kind of thing. They're leaving, I said to him. We only had a couple of minutes. I'd finally got him from home, and there was about a half an hour in which he could go home and get the family and bring them, and it was really there was no time at all. I said, they're leaving, it's real. I'd gone to the embassy to make sure it wasn't just a run-through rehearsal. What do you want to do? And he's looking at me as though, what do I want to do? And I knew that what I wanted to do would affect him, but he already knew what I wanted to do. It was just so intermeshed that there was no way, we looking at each other, knowing each of us wants to stay, and not being able to identify what part of it is, which part of each of us is reacting, is doing something or deciding because the other wants to do it. And he says, I don't see us in any immediate danger. Because both of us didn't believe the Khmer Rouge would be as crazy or brutal as they turned out to be. And that was based on our reporting. We thought it was sound. It wasn't.
We were told that the Khmer Rouge come to Phnom Penh will have a bloodbath, and I didn't believe that the Cambodian will kill their own people. And that's why I decide to stay to see what's going on after the Khmer Rouge took over. But why, one thing I'm afraid, only the shelling attack. That's why I let my family leave Phnom Penh.
I said, well, get the family now and run, and I'll go and try to hold the gates at the embassy, and I ran over there. And I think I've always felt afterward that, you know, I hashed that over in my mind again and again. Would he have said that if he hadn't known that I wanted to stay? If I had said, look, I think we ought to leave, what do you want to do? That he would have said, would he have said, I want to go, or would he have tried to talk me into staying? And of course, with him missing and potentially dead, that was something I stayed up a lot of nights thinking about. How much did I influence him? But I already knew I was responsible for him.
It starts with a pan, a slight pan, doesn't it?
Yes,
There's a
the
guy
guy
going
runs across, I think.
I'd like to try that.
And look at the trim of that. If we cut away from this scene and go to the walking away on the exterior, where would you want to cut out of this?
Let there be an overlap. I think it'd have to be an overlap. But I think it would certainly work. I mean, if we go straight from this outside, then I think we should use an overlap.
Okay. Most of the time in those 5 days between the departure of the Americans and the arrival of the Khmer Rouge, when you were in the center city, people were doing what seemed to be surreal things. I mean, I wrote about it. One day I was driving toward the front and a man was plucking his chin whiskers using his van mirror very calmly. Children were playing on swings in the park below the temple called the Phnom. It was the beginning of New Year's, and the government press agency was putting out its daily mimeograph sheet, and it was in color, and it was honoring the New Year. So these things were going on. And announcements were made. There was a new minister of mines appointed, I believe, in that period. While the city was about to fall, while great battles were taking place, while the number of wounded was soaring into the hundreds and more every day, there were these odd things that this search for normality, which is really not odd or surreal, because I think in every crisis of this kind, every war, people desperately grope for normality, try to pretend that things are going to be okay. They're just trying not to see the war, because it was unthinkable. It always is. I don't think we realized anything about the Khmer Rouge until very late in the day that they actually arrived. Even at the beginning, there were some troops whom we came to think of as the false Khmer Rouge. We never knew who they were. They may have been indeed a Khmer Rouge unit, but they were celebratory. They were accepting all of the spirit of the local Cambodians. People were yelling peace and throwing flowers. And for a time, it looked as though that was a spirit in which these troops would enter the city. And then we began to hear stories from the southern part of the city that were units down there that weren't so benign, that were arresting people. And then we heard about the evacuation. And these things came in bits and pieces because we couldn't travel. Or maybe we could travel, but we were a little bit reluctant to move freely about the city. So we, being our little group, went to places like the cable office. And then finally we went to the hospital, because it was a ritual with me anyway and Pran to go every day to at least one of the hospitals to see the rate of casualties and to talk to the wounded. It was one of the stops we made every day.
Yeah, what we're supposed to do, second a lullaby, all right, then Pentatol, 150 milligrams. Did it? Blood group A. You know, we've had 2 units of blood in the last 2 days, gentlemen. Oh. Mind you, we've got plenty of blood, gentlemen. Oh, yes, plenty of blood. Problem is, it's all in the wrong fucking place.
Okay, good.
All right, hold it there.
That's beginning to come into shape. I mean, when you're talking to them, it's very professional.
Yes.
And I think you don't want to alter the pace when you're talking to the journalists.
Don't alter, just
Yeah,
straight.
I mean, I think you're saying, because in a way that you'll all have very mixed feelings about the journalists. The guys you know, on the other hand, they are awfully like vultures. And Bill, there are hands here that need bloodying up before we shoot. Okay, right, let's set up for one more.
Action!
Ketamine, 50 milligrams.
It was a charnel house. Literally, there was blood in the corridors everywhere. Bodies had been laid in the corridors. People had died in corridors. Doctors hadn't come into work because it was clear the city was falling. And when we'd had enough of that, because it was just so much you could take, people crying out, it was awful. We left to get into our car, and we got into the car, and I said, "No, what?" He says, "They told him to go, to run away. But they were only looking for the tom-toms, the big people, the important people." And he said, no, he couldn't leave. He had to stay with his friends.
I say, "Sir, we don't know what to speak in communist language." I just say, "Sir, these people are really not American people. They are journalists. And they don't speak Cambodian. I'm the one who can translate and can help you to find out the truth. So please let me get in with these people."
And I looked at him, and it was very hard to believe. So much was happening at the time. And I knew that he'd done it was a true act of courage. I mean, sometimes I think that we talk about courage, and we're really talking about adrenaline and instant reaction and so forth. But this was something that he really had to think for a moment about. I mean, he was making a choice at that time. And it was courage based upon loyalty and his sense of service to all of us. And he got in.
That we are not American. We are French, and these three people, international correspondent, and then they put them aside, and I was allowed to talk a lot with the Khmer Rouge officer. So I tried to explain to them that we not part of the government. We're not part of American government. We're not part of the Phnom Penh government at all. We are represent the eyes of the people. I mean, when we see you are good, we tell the world is good. You know, we are so pleased that the war is over. That's what I told him.
He was bluffing. He was taking a chance that if they went to that headquarters, they would say, "These are journalists, you can let them go." And finally, they sent this messenger on a motorcycle. And while we were allowed to sit and the weapons were lowered and we were allowed to get a drink of water, and we waited. And I thought to myself, I think of bravery as someone not being afraid of shells and mortar fire. I think his is greater. I think his comes from the courage to do the right thing regardless of what's going on. And that's what he was doing throughout. There's also a sense of optimism that having been a good person in his life, that in his religion, he would not go unrewarded.
The foreigners and their Cambodian friends sought refuge in the French embassy, the only sanctuary the Khmer Rouge recognized. It was temporary. The Khmer Rouge demanded that all the Cambodian men leave, even those married to Westerners. Schanberg's frantic efforts to save Pran failed. He too had to be delivered to the Khmer Rouge.
Pran and I had a discussion. It was a little bit like the discussion we had when the Americans evacuated, a discussion about whether we would stay or not. It was one of these things where we looked at each other and both agreed that about what we had to do, but knew it was terrible. And Pran said, no, I will go, and we talked optimistically about him making his way to the Thai border and coming out, and you know that's where you should go, and so forth, like trying to put aside any possible thoughts that of the reality out there that he might not be able to travel freely and escape and so forth.
I think he felt angry because he think he can do something hide me in the something in baggage or something. So that's I think he could do much better than that instead of let me out. But I was not mad to him because I know he did all his best to try to help me, and I don't think he is guilty about that.
I don't think there's any way to get around the word. I mean, for several years I felt guilty. I think that was a wrong feeling, but I felt it anyway. But I was responsible for him, just as he'd been responsible for me. I mean, he'd saved my life. And I don't think there was any way to avoid that sense of responsibility.
While the foreigners were deported by truck to Thailand, the 2 million inhabitants of Phnom Penh, Pran amongst them, were marched into the countryside. Society was to begin again. This was year zero.
We learn along the way. We know that the Khmer Rouge is real barbarous people, because you can see about his voice, he talking to the people. He gets so jealous, so angry to the city people, and they really tough. I mean, he insult, humiliated. They say you gotta go fast and move fast to the countryside. We have to go to plant the rice.
For the next 3.5 years, the cities were void. The country became a vast agricultural gulag. Anyone suspected of bourgeois ties, like working for the New York Times, risked death. It is impossible to say how many people died of disease or of hunger or were executed, but it was perhaps as high as 2 million.
Every night they have a meeting, so the cadre of the village, they brainwash you, they explain you how to live with them. They said, don't say you have not enough food. You never complain at all. You have to listen what the Angkar, I mean the leadership, tell you to do. So you become like you're a private soldier. But the life there is worse than prisoner, because you work 12 hours, 14 hours, depend on the season, and then they re-educate you by...
is one symbol of the story of Cambodia. The film's makers consider that its implications go beyond Cambodia itself.
In the end, don't forget, it's based very closely on an American story, an American tale. Kind of, in many ways, an American morality story. And the American reaction to it is going to be very interesting. It's going to be even more interesting when you think that I started this picture, for me, it started in November 1979. And here we are, 3.5 years later, where the parallels between this film and El Salvador, and this interview will probably go out, in a year's time, maybe 9 months' time, those parallels will be even closer, I'm sure of that. So what's very difficult is we're treading a very thin line, because we're dealing in something that happened a decade ago, but whose resonances are probably stronger today than they were 5 years ago, and whose resonances in a year's time when the film comes out are liable to be stronger still.
It's a morality story for all major powers, and it's a very old story. It's not a novel, it's not a new story, and for me I'm less interested in its kind of immediate political relevance, though that's important, as to what it's actually saying about the way human beings comport themselves generally. I mean, for me it's not actually just a war picture.
I think it's an old lesson. I think you learn that number one, yes, in a personal sense, in one-on-one, you are your brother's keeper. But number two, you learn you can't save everybody. I mean, you can look out there and feel badly, but you can't make solutions for everybody. As a government, you can't do that. You can help. But you have to help, I believe, in ways that make sense to the people who live there. And there is no magic. And I think that they may seem like conflicting ideas. If you are your brother's keeper, then maybe people might say, well, then shouldn't you bring democracy to all of them? Well, you must say, whose democracy? And in the process of that mission, will you so disrupt the country that you leave it in shambles? And I think we did that in Cambodia. I think we created the conditions for chaos and massacre and Holocaust. And I think to the extent that we created those conditions, we are responsible for them. And the Khmer Rouge are responsible for what they did.
Can I ask you one final question? How did the events portrayed in this film change your life?
I think they changed my life in the sense that they make me feel more responsible for people who have less than I do. I am not a missionary, and I am not a saint, and I don't live up to those thoughts all the time. But I think they've made me feel that I have a responsibility to do for others who do not have my influence or power or money. And I don't have a lot of money, but so mostly it's my influence as a journalist.
For Pran, as for Cambodia, the end of the story is not very comfortable. He is reunited with his wife and children, but, like thousands of Cambodians, they are exiled from their country, perhaps forever. New York is their home now. The United States, which previously did so much to contribute to the chaos in Cambodia, now provides refuge for some of the victims of that chaos. And in Cambodia itself, another war continues, relegated now to the inside pages of the Western press.
Sidney Schamberg is still working for the New York Times, but he's no longer a foreign correspondent. Now he's a columnist. He's writing about New York City in the middle pages of the paper. The film, The Killing Fields, opens in London this Friday. It'll be on general release early next year. Well, that's all for tonight and for 1984, because our season now is ended. But Omnibus will be back in March, and our next series will have all sorts of features for your delight. Kiri Tikanua teams up with Leonard Bernstein for an opera-orientated version of that wonderful musical West Side Story with Jose Carreras. Omnibus filmed the recording sessions. Sir Michael Tippett celebrates his 80th birthday, conducting a week of his music and Elgar's at the Malvern Festival. We have a film with Dame Elizabeth Frink, the sculptor, narrated by her old friend Laurie Lee, the author of Cider with Rosie. We watch a new Royal Shakespeare Company play coming to life during rehearsals down in Stratford-on-Avon. And we travel to Maine in New England, the home of the author Stephen King, who lifts the veil on his childhood, on the high school hops, the burger bars and the ballparks, which form the backcloth of his world of everyday terror in the American heartland. So, until next spring, it's goodbye to you from Omnibus. Good night.